check 1 2. Check 1 2. Check 1 2. Microphone check 1 2.
Good morning participants. We would like to start the workshop. If you could take your seats, please. I start, yeah? So, good morning, everyone. Very good to see you all. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to this workshop on life cycle refrigerant management, or LRM. The workshop was requested by the parties in Decision 3511 of last year. The decision requested the Ozone Secretariat to organize a one-day workshop to share information, experiences, and lessons learned on LRM, assess challenges related to ways of strengthening LRM, including existing and potential policies, best practices, standards, and opportunities. We have had a number of workshops in the recent times and listened to the comments of the parties on how we can improve our workshops. Based on those comments, we have attempted to make this workshop less dense and long by reducing the number of presentations and also replacing the concluding session with the use of our mobile app for participants to submit their key takeaway messages so that we can close the workshop, hopefully before 6:30 p.m. or so. The key messages we receive will be compiled and summarized into a document for consideration by the parties at the preparatory segment of the COP-MOP that will start tomorrow. We have also tried to make the workshop more interactive by having 4 parallel breakout sessions on key stages of LRM for deep dives into those areas. Repeating this twice should enable participants to attend more than one breakout group. LRM plays an important role in ozone layer protection and climate change mitigation by reducing emissions of ODS and HFCs, and effective LRM supports resource efficiency and circular economy, reduces the demand for production of new substances, and conserves valuable resources. The climate benefits of LRM can be really significant, as we have heard from TEEP. Today's workshop is designed to offer comprehensive insights into effective LRM approaches. Let me acknowledge the contribution of the TEEP, whose work through its task force on LRM has set a solid foundation for today's discussions. The task force report was presented at the OEWG in July, and many found the report very comprehensive and informative, and it sets the scene for today's discussion and beyond. So we have gathered a distinguished set of resource persons for this workshop from the TEEP task force, as well as policymakers and practitioners from governments and private sector. We also have our good colleagues from various parts of UNEP, such as Ozone Action, CCAC, Multilateral Fund, and Basel Convention. Thank you very much to all of you who have accepted to be resource persons to share their knowledge, experiences, and skills. Appreciation also goes to the 8 organizations for putting up their great exhibition booths just outside this meeting hall. So thank you very much for the efforts. Let me encourage each and every participant to visit the booths and to participate actively in the discussions to share your perspectives, needs, and solutions at this workshop, which we hope will set the path for further work of the parties and the partners on LRM. So thank you very much, distinguished participants. Let me now hand the floor to Liazat, my good colleague here, who has been managing all the organizational aspects of this workshop. So Liazat, thank you. Here you go.
Thank you very much. Good morning, distinguished participants. I will just take you through the workshop structure and organization. As Meg mentioned, we organized the workshop in 5 sessions. First, starting with introduction to life cycle refrigerant management, which will start immediately after my presentation. Then we go to a session on country experiences with implementing LRM. After this session, as Meg explained, we'll have session 3, which is composed of 4 parallel breakout groups. The rooms will be announced, but they are also available on the meeting app, which allows participants to look at different components and aspects of LRM as a comprehensive management approach, looking at leak prevention, recovery, recycling, and reclamation, destruction of refrigerants, and also we added dealing with equipment, where there is a chance to interact with our colleagues from the Basel Convention Secretariat. In session 3, session 3 will be repeated after lunch break, which will last 1 hour and a half, and it will be a repeat of the parallel breakout groups in a way to allow you to attend at least 2 breakout groups of your interest. Then, in the afternoon, we'll come back for the last substantive session of this workshop, Financing Life Cycle Refrigerant Management, which will take place in this room. And then the final session with the closure of the workshop, where we will try to collect your takeaway messages from this workshop, which will be summarized for the outcome document as a pre-session meeting document for MOP 36. These are meeting documents that are available as usual on the workshop portal. The concept note and program has been available since end of August. We've updated it a few times, including just last night, because we had a replacement in one of the panelists. We also prepared briefing notes, which allow to support discussions in different in different sessions of the workshop, as well as some infographics in high resolution that you are very much welcome to use if you find it useful. All today's presentations are also available online. As was mentioned by Meg, we've gathered a distinguished panel of speakers for this workshop, and their full biographies are available, compiled in a speaker's brochure, also available on the meeting portal. These are 8 organizations that have kindly agreed and are contributing to the exhibition dedicated to life cycle refrigerant management, where they're showing their experiences of working on this approach, including BRS Secretariat that was mentioned, and our other partners, as well as the private sector companies. The outcomes will be presented under item 4C of the provisional agenda of the Montreal Protocol issues, likely on Monday or Tuesday morning. And just to remind you about our very useful meeting app, which you can, if you don't have it, you can download using the title of our meeting, MOP 36, where you'll find the schedules of all the sessions, allocations of the room for the breakout groups, links to the live streaming on our YouTube channel, and live streaming is also available for the breakout groups, as well as the interactive polls that will be used throughout this workshop. And just the last slide on logistics, DSAs will be available from tomorrow at the usual place in this venue. The prayers rooms are available, and the main cafeteria on ground on the first floor will be open from 12 to 3 today. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy the workshop. Now I would like to give the stage to Stephanie Haysmith, our communications officer.
Thank you very much, Liazat. Welcome, good morning, distinguished delegates. Before we delve into the workshop, as mentioned before, we're going to have some interactive poll questions using the mobile app for our meeting. So if I could ask you to open up your app, you'll see under the page, the opening page, you'll see a notification which will prompt you to the first of the poll questions. If you don't see the notification on the home page of the app, if you go to the LRM meeting schedule and click and opening up this meeting schedule, so you should see the first poll question there. So for the first question, what is LRM? Please type in a keyword or two of what LRM means to you. Be mindful that there is a character limitation of 25. And as you can see, the results will come in almost instantaneously. So one of the key words is sustainability by the looks of things. Very good. For question 2 on the scale, please rate your understanding of LRM as it stands as of now. Again, you should see the results coming in now. Okay, so quite a good level of knowledge, it would seem. Very good. Great. Thank you all for participating in this, and obviously these inputs and results will be collated at the end and will be inserted in our concluding document. Moving on, I'd like to introduce to you Hilda Dont. Hilda is a member of the Technology and Economic Assessment Panel. It's Refrigeration Technical Options Committee, the RTOC. As mentioned before, the full biographies of all our distinguished workshop speakers is available on our meeting portal under the LRM workshop pre-session documents. For this session, there's also a briefing note, Introduction to LRM, and an infographic that can also be found under the same tab. Hilda, the lectern is yours.
Good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure to start today's workshop with an introduction to life cycle refrigerant management, or in short, LRM. I will first cover what LRM is, the key practices and the benefits, and I will give you also a short recap of the key findings from the TEEP LRM Task Force report. The Ozone Secretariat actually made a very nice infographic to explain what life cycle refrigerant management, or LRM, is. The graphic shows that LRM is a multiple approach, a comprehensive list of actions to manage the refrigerants throughout their entire life cycle. It includes the production, the storage, transportation of the refrigerants, but also the equipment, refrigeration, air conditioning and heat pump equipment that needs to be properly designed, manufactured, installed, operated and maintained. and of course, the recovery, reuse, and environmental sound disposal of refrigerants. Indeed, there are 4 key practices of LRM: leakage prevention, recovery, reuse, either directly or after recycling or reclamation, and when it's needed, destruction of refrigerants. The Ozone Secretariat has organized several breakout sessions today to discuss these practices in more detail. LRM offers numerous benefits and can be linked to many of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Here are just 4 examples. 1. LRM results in climate, ozone, and other environmental health and safety benefits. 2. Through leakage prevention, it maintains the performance of refrigeration, air conditioning, and heat pump systems, thus providing energy savings, cutting operational costs, and minimizing the indirect emissions from energy use. 3. It contributes to a circular economy and promotes resource efficiency, decreasing the reliance on virgin substances. And 4, LRM generates new employment opportunities, for example, in system maintenance, recovery, recycling, but also environmental auditing. Modeling estimates that compared to a pre-Kigali baseline, LRM measures alone could contribute to avoided emissions of up to 5 ODP kilotons and up to 39 gigatons of CO2 equivalent, cumulative from 2025 to 2050. More details on the climate and ozone benefits of LRM can be found in Chapter 8 of the TEEP LRM Task Force report. The TEEP LRM Task Force, consisting of 22 members, published a detailed report in May 2024, which was presented at the 46th OEWG in Montreal. It has 9 chapters covering various aspects, including the technologies for leakage prevention, recovery, recycling, reclamation, and destruction, the accessibility of these technologies in Article 5 parties, and many examples of LRM policies and programs that are currently in place in several parties. It also covers the obstacles, challenges, and associated costs, as well as the climate and ozone benefits, as I mentioned earlier. The task force report highlighted several key findings. While LRM technologies are available, they are not accessible in all Article 5 parties. There are policy, economic, and accessibility obstacles and challenges associated with effective LRM. It was also noted that if a phase-out or phase-down regime creates a shortage of refrigerant and leads to price increases, then refrigerant recovery may increase. However, if supply of newly produced refrigerant remains plentiful, other policy and economic measures may be required. Mandatory and voluntary policies and programs are currently implemented in many parties with varying levels of effectiveness. And establishing a data collection system by parties could inform their decision-making for optimal LRM strategies. In Chapter 6 of the report, we described many obstacles and challenges, including policy, technical, economic, and logistic challenges. For example, the lack of recovery cylinders can simply stop LRM. The chapter also described the need for technician training, as people may not be aware of the importance of LRM, may lack the knowledge or the skills for effective LRM, or may not behave accordingly even when they have the required knowledge and skills. I would like to highlight here an example of how a policy can either facilitate or hinder LRM. On the slide, you can see 2 flowcharts, A and B. A red arrow means the recovered refrigerant is considered waste, and a blue dotted arrow means it's not waste. Can you see the difference between flowchart A and flowchart B? I'll give you a few seconds. Indeed, the difference is in the lower left corner of the flowcharts. In case A, recovered refrigerant is always considered waste, unless it's directly reused by the technician. It changes back from waste to non-waste after a recycling or reclamation process took place. In case B, recovered refrigerant is only considered waste when it is intended to be destroyed. If it's intended to be reused, either directly or through recycling or reclamation, it's not considered waste. Why is this important? Because the definition of waste influences the logistic and administrative burden for the technicians and for the storage and transport of recovered refrigerants, both within and across borders. I hope this can be part of your discussions in the workshop today. Despite the many obstacles and challenges, the task force pointed out that LRM presents significant opportunities. It can be a key component of refrigerant emission reductions, achieving results beyond those from strict Kigali compliance. And for some parties, LRM may even be essential to meet the Kigali targets. In conclusion, life cycle refrigerant management is crucial for environmental protection and sustainability. By implementing effective LRM, we can achieve significant climate and ozone benefits, provide energy savings, promote resource efficiency, and create new job opportunities. On behalf of the TEEP LRM Task Force, I would like to thank the Ozone Secretariat for the organization of the workshop, and I hope you will all enjoy the discussions today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hilda, for setting the scene of the workshop with this presentation. On a note on the presentations, these are all going to be available on the meeting portal under the workshop. The next session is going to be on country experiences with LRM management, and there is a briefing note on this as well that is available on policies for LRM, and that's also on the LRM workshop in the meeting portal for your information. Your co-facilitators for this session, Denise San Valentin from UNEP's Climate and Clean Air Coalition, and Jim Cullen from UNEP's Ozone Action Programme. Denise, Jim, the floor is yours. Kindly ask the panelists to come.
Okay, thank you, Stephanie, and good morning to everyone. As mentioned, we are moving to the second session of the LRM workshop on country experiences with life cycle refrigerant management. I'm Denise, and I'm just remembering that 20 years ago when I was part of the National Ozone Unit of the Philippines, you know, the management or what to do with ODS banks has already been a question. And fast forward to today, we are discussing this now, and I'm very, very excited just thinking about, you know, the potential opportunities in LRM, the possible, you know, benefits for ozone layer protection, as well as for climate, for economies, health, and food security.
Yes, good morning, everyone. And listening to Hilda describe the different components of LRM, you know, none of these are new topics to us. We've been dealing with them individually for decades under Montreal Protocol. And I think that, that what's different now is that we're looking at them as a continuum and as a system, and this concept of life cycle management is something somewhat new to Montreal Protocol community. So I think under Kigali, we really need to start connecting the dots and seeing how things relate to one another. And as Denise said, that provides a lot of opportunities for unlocking even more potential under the Montreal Protocol and Kigali Amendment. So in this session, we're going to share and discuss the implementation experiences with lifecycle refrigerant management in various countries that have very different contexts. And they have followed different approaches, they have different priorities, and they've identified different cross-cutting areas. And each country has its own considerations. And the session is going to start first with an overview presentation that's given by an expert who we'll introduce in a few moments.
And then each country representative will share their experience in a nutshell, after which we will guide the panel through a discussion, and at the end there will be a question and answer session with the audience. As mentioned by Stephanie, the full slides from each of the presenters are already available in the meeting portal.
Our first presenter will be Irene Pabst, who is a senior advisor for HEAT GmbH for the Climate and Ozone Protection Alliance, the COPA, which many of you have heard about. She'll give us the overview presentation. And just to note that all of the presentations are online and can be viewed from the meeting portal. So I think I'll turn it over to Irene for the next presentation. Oops, sorry.
Thank you, Jim, and good morning from my side also. I was given quite a challenge. I was given maximum 10 minutes to provide you an overview with LRM policies, which I think is just not possible. So naturally, I picked a few priorities, and it will not be comprehensive at all. To start with, you got a really nice briefing note that has at least a few more pages. You know also the Deep Task Force report is very comprehensive, so we're trying to narrow down the scope at the moment. Since we are talking here with country experiences, I will also focus on country experiences, but I just wanted to show the overview slide that you also see in the briefing note, that of course it has a link to international policies, to the Montreal Protocol work that we are doing here, to the United Framework Convention on Climate Change, to the Basel Convention. So all this is of course related, but this is not what I will talk about right now. I will more focus on the lower part of the graphic about what can be done in a country. And for this, I actually took over some concept that is from waste management, and I called it Banks Management Hierarchy, where you see those little triangles here, or larger triangles here on the screen, that show preferable actions from most preferable to least preferable. And of course, that's a bit different for all the substance groups. And I'm not telling you anything new, that for CFCs and HCFCs, that's different than for HFCs. For substances, that's already out, and for CFCs, of course, we already agreed on not using them anymore, but they're still there. So containment is still something that is important. And let me just quickly explain what I mean with recover chemicals. That means where there are large chemical industries, it's possible to use the CFCs and break them down for hydrofluoric acid and hydrochloric acid to use the chemicals again. So that means from a circular economy perspective, this is of course very wanted, but we also know that this is not possible in all parts of the world since you really need a large chemical infrastructure for that endeavor. So often for CFCs, the last resort is then destroying them. For HCFCs, of course, containment is still key, and since they are still in use, recycling and reclamation is what we still want to do. Bearing in mind that the world also has agreed to phase out the use of HCFCs, so at some point it might be or is advisable to stop the recycling and reclamation, but really make sure it's not emitted in the end, but once it is in the cylinder, also then be destroyed or recovered as a chemical. Let me focus on HFCs. We're still in the onset, or not in the onset, but still in the position to also avoid their use. Of course, not completely, but where there are alternatives, there is possibility to avoid, and I will go on that on the next slide. I will not stay here. So When you start the triangle, and we'll go now all these different steps from top to bottom, when we start with avoid, there's still possibilities here to avoid the use of fluorinated refrigerants. That means every kilogram that is not put on the market means that you don't have to deal with it afterwards. So that means wherever possible, where it's safely possible, where it's technically possible, this is something that can be done. And that would mean, on a policy perspective, on the country level, to set a clear market guidance, to limit the use of controlled substances, maybe as on their global warming potential, maybe also on their constituents, and to set clear product bans where alternatives are available, so the market knows. And the timely you announce that, or is announced in the country, the more the market can adapt. Also a possibility to guide the market and to give an incentive to move towards lower GWP refrigerants and maybe not fluorinated refrigerants is to establish a GWP-weighted import tax. And also a quite elegant way, I would say, when talking about energy efficiency regulations from appliances, that could be also linked to refrigerant requirements for certain products, where it can also be really streamlined where alternatives actually are available. The next one on the priority list is, of course, containment. Only things can be managed if they are contained. So the first thing is to have a formal venting ban. Of course, implementation and enforcement is key here, but it starts also with the policy that this is the preferred practice. It can then go on with putting obligations to the operators of equipment, maybe also part of their size and the charge size, for regular inspections for system tightments, which means predictive and preventive maintenance. And in case a leak is detected, to demand prompt repair. And to make this happen, that leads to proper technician training and certification. And also demand only that certified technicians are allowed to work on an open refrigerant circuit. So we have proper practices. And of course, also for recycling reclamation, proper training is required. And for recycling and reclaim, we heard already that supporting economics by limiting the amount of available virgin refrigerant is one key element to spark that recycling and reclamation chain. But only wanting to do it is not enough. It needs reverse logistic systems, as I would call it, meaning to oblige the distributors to take back used refrigerant, because they have the logistics to distribute it to the market, so that it could be also used to take it back. And to also then spark the recovery and the reuse of substances. If the reverse logistic is there, the technician knows where to get rid of the recovered refrigerant. If not, be able to use in the same system, since this would be the preferred way, if possible, if technically possible, since it also reduces the amount that needs to be treated, reclaimed, and treated in a logistics way. And of course, along with that goes a standard for recycled and especially reclaimed refrigerants to ensure quality and also to increase the market acceptance, so technicians are really sure what they're buying and what they put in systems and are content that this will work. So the very last step, if nothing else has worked before, of course, destroying appliances and refrigerants at the end of life is the last resort if circular economy did not work before. And I separated it for appliances and refrigerants. It basically reads the same, but I think it's a different story if it's importers and manufacturers of equipment, of appliances that are responsible, or the importers and distributors of the substances themselves. And that leads back to a principle of polluter pays. So either the importers or the operators of the equipment that actually, use the refrigerants for the services, for cooling a room, or in an industrial process, are also required to take care of the destruction, meaning the financial burden could also be put on the operators. If you want to read it in more detail, I just highlight one publication here. There are many out there, but since that was the one that I was contributing most, this is the one of the Climate and Ozone Protection Alliance. And I hope I nicely set the scene for you all to grab into details. Thank you very much and good luck.
Thank you, Irene. Now, we will invite you to take out your phones again and use the app for the next interactive poll on sharing your opinion. The question that you will see in your app or in the poll is, what are the key needs for the implementation of LRM in your country. So it's a multiple choice, and you can just choose between or among the 4 choices. To what extent does your country implement a life cycle approach in refrigerant management? Okay, so we are seeing dots. It's fun, huh? This is really interesting.
Yeah, it looks like lots of green dots, lots of blue dots at the top. So it looks like we implement some aspects with moderate results. There's room for improvement, seems to be at the lead at present, followed by, we know what LRM is, but we lack the capacity resources to take action. And then the third is we're fully integrating LRM approaches nationwide. So it's quite a variety. It looks like partial, and I think this this also aligns with the results of the first poll that was conducted earlier. So it looks pretty evenly spread between the first 3 results. Great, great. Lots of thumbs up and hearts and so forth. So what is crucial for implementing LRM in your country?
Okay, this is the word cloud, and I hope, we can read it. We can read the big font indeed. So what is crucial for implementing LRM in your country? So policy seems to be the biggest word at the moment in this word cloud. I see resources, funding, capacity or capacity building, incentives, and finance, legislation, certification, technology, and now my eyes cannot see.
And it is Sunday morning, by the way. Yeah, it looks like things have coalesced around funding, policy, capacity building. There's regulation enforcement, technologies in there. Okay, so it looks pretty aligned, but big role for policy and funding. Okay, is what we see. Okay, so by the way, we'll have questions for Irene during the general question and answer session at the end of this period. So now we're going to hear from our speakers, our distinguished speakers, about their country's experiences about implementing LRM. And each presenter is going to share aspects of their country's LRM approach, including what policies are used and how they're implemented and what worked and any challenges and their future plans. So yeah, so that's the nature of this panel discussion, hearing from the countries about what they've already done as inspiration and examples for others to follow.
So I will just introduce all of the speakers now, but we will first hear from 4 speakers and then have a discussion and then listen to the next 3 presenters. So in our panel, I'm very proud to introduce our panelists, starting with Mr. Teruo Kogu, the Director of the Office of Fluorocarbon Control Policy in the Ministry of Environment of Japan. We also have Ms. Annie Gabriel from the Mercury, Ozone and Climate Protection Section in the Australian Government Department of Climate Change, Energy, the Environment and Water. It's a long name for your ministry. We have Ms. Senia Mesariti, the Legal Officer from the European Commission. We have Ms. Pauline Papo from the National Ozone Unit of Ghana's Environmental Protection Agency. We have Ms. Nancy Ackerman, the Senior Policy Advisor from the United States Environmental Protection Agency. We have Mr. Sergio Merino, from, the National Ozone Officer at Mexico's Secretary of Environment and Natural Resources. And last but not the least, Mr. Aditya Narayan Singh, who is the Additional Director of the Ozone Cell, Ministry of Environment, Forests and Climate in India. So as mentioned, we will first start with 4 countries, and I'd like to give the floor to Japan, Mr. Teruo Kogu.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Teruo Kogu from the Ministry of the Environment, Japan. First, I'd like to express my sincere appreciation to the team for preparing the LRM report, to the Ozone Secretariat to organize this workshop and providing me with the opportunity to be a speaker. In Japan, a couple of laws are utilized in fluorocarbon management, as the TEEP report shows. Among them, today I would like to introduce efforts under the Fluorocarbon Emissions Control Act, which mainly focuses on cooling equipment for industrial and commercial use. This slide shows the framework provided by the Act for mitigating emissions of refrigerants. The Act was formulated in 2013, introduces comprehensive measures in each step of the life cycle from production, use, through to disposal, replacing the former Fluorocarbon Recovery and Destruction Act of 2001, which only targeted recovery and destruction. Today, I will focus on the use and disposal stages. Regarding use, the Act imposes some obligations on equipment managers on the right side. First, equipment managers need to install equipment in an appropriate location, as well as check and record the condition of equipment. When leakage is detected, filling refrigerant without repairing is prohibited in principle. Also, equipment managers leaking a large amount of refrigerant need to report to the national government. With regard to filling and recovery of refrigerants, equipment managers need to consign the service to filling and recovery operators registered by prefectural governors. The operators must have adequate knowledge and meet designated standards in conducting the work. With regard to disposal, there is a system in which equipment managers check the completion of recovery of refrigerants by documents. This can be done online. The recovered refrigerants are handed to either recycling operators or destruction operators. These operators must obtain a license from the national government to ensure appropriate recycling and destruction. The next slide shows measurable outcomes. The Act requires reports from relevant business operators. These graphs show such data. At the top on the left is the report on leakage amounts. The graph shows in terms of CO2 equivalent, and the total amount continued to be the same level. However, as to the actual amount, without converting to CO2 equivalent, we have a decreasing trend. At the top on the right is the recovery amount and rate of recovery at disposal. The blue bars are the recovery amount at the time of disposal, and the green one are recovered amount at maintenance. The line graph shows the rate of recovery at disposal. The recovery rate has a slightly increasing level, a trend. The most recent rate is 44%. At the bottom on the left is the amount of destruction. We have a decreasing trend recently. At the bottom on the right is the amount of recycling, which includes reclamation. We have an increasing trend here. We still have challenges such as cases of failing to report and data gaps. so we need to improve them. However, these data are important to understand the situation and provide important insights for additional measures. Next, I would like to speak about the successes and challenges of the Act. As the first point of success, stakeholders' responsibilities are clear and legally defined by the Act. There are clear stipulations on what to do. The second point of success is close collaboration by governments and industry organizations to enhance compliance. Local governments are making ongoing efforts to raising awareness about the Act and give guidance through on-site inspections. The Act and industry organizations are also proactive in efforts to raise awareness and conduct training sessions for technicians. The third point of success is collaboration with other laws. For example, local governments can recognize the timing of demolition by the notice under the Construction Material Recycling Act and make an efficient on-site inspection. The fourth point of success is identification of issues and continuous improvements based on data collected from various stakeholders. Using the data I showed, we delivered the further measures. At the same time, we still have challenges. First, there is a challenge of detection of illegal release. Once refrigerants are released into the atmosphere, there is no evidence. In this case, we need to catch releasing at the scene. The second challenge is raising awareness of small business owners. There are a lot of small businesses, and the scope of the businesses are very wide. We continue to consider ways to raise awareness. The third challenge is collection of accurate data. This includes the issue of accuracy of estimates. Data is important for development of policies, so we need to check data for maximum accuracy. Finally, I would like to add that Japan has promoted the initiative on fluorocarbons life cycle management to support developing countries. We have set up an exhibition booth here, and we'll hold a side event next Thursday. You are very welcome to join us. I'd also like you to check the detailed information in additional slides not displayed today. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Kogu-san, and I really like the name of their act. It's the Act on the Rational Use. So basically, if you don't follow it, you're being irrational. I think that's, very interesting. Now we will proceed to the next speaker. I'd like to give the floor to Annie from Australia.
Thank you very much, Denise and Jim. It's my pleasure to be here. Mostly my pleasure to be here if I can coordinate the technology. One of my colleagues was slated to speak today, but she's unwell, so hopefully I will sit in and do as good a job as she was going to do. So, actually, it's a bit tricky to read some of the slides here, and I hope that people will be able to look at it on the website. But this is trying to be a pictorial representation of our framework, which is actually a co-regulatory and a cooperative arrangement that we have with industry. So yes, we have regulations, we have legislation, we have requirements, but we also have a coordinated approach with industry, and they contribute significantly to implementation of our framework for life cycle refrigerant management. So on the government side, we obviously implement regulations, we manage the compliance aspects of the program. We've also implemented a couple of bans, which we think are actually quite important to actually having a successful refrigerant management framework in Australia. One is a ban on deliberate discharge, and I'm sure that many other countries will have that as well. but also we have a ban on non-refillable containers, and that ban actually, together, they provide expectations that refrigerant will be recovered at the end of their life, that it will not be released, except in the normal operation of the equipment, and that these bans are actually also reflected in codes of practice and in standards that are picked up and used by technicians in Australia. They also have a requirement to find and remedy leaks as well. The non-refillable containers ban actually reduces emissions, and it actually creates a supply chain in Australia. So I sort of think about our refrigerant management as actually a cylinder management. You have to have cylinders that come into non-refillable ISO tankers that come in. You have to fill the smaller cylinders that go out to the businesses and then to the technicians, and then recovery cylinders are used to return refrigerant to the businesses by the technicians, and then decanted into bigger cylinders for primarily for destruction. So that is those bans and those regulatory that regulatory framework, I think, allows all of those other subsequent initiatives and actions to happen. So on the industry side, I might actually have to go to my phone because I can't actually see it clearly. So, so on the industry side, we have the Australian Refrigeration Council, which is an industry board that has been set up to, in collaboration with the Australian government, to actually manage the certification scheme or the licensing of technicians and the licensing of businesses that import, handle and use refrigerants in Australia. And that is allowed for under the Act. So the Minister has the ability to appoint industry boards. Under the Act, we also have a requirement that businesses that are importing gas have to be part of a product stewardship scheme. And we have one in Australia, which is Refrigerant Reclaim Australia, and that is an industry-run, non-for-profit product stewardship scheme. And so everyone has to be part of that. We have destruction facilities, which is the third little box down on the left-hand side. Those, we have a regulatory framework for those, but those are commercially run destruction facilities in Australia. And then the fourth box, on both sides actually, is education and awareness, and that responsibility lies with both industry and with government. And so those elements all together make up our framework, which we consider as a co-regulatory licensing scheme for refrigeration technicians and businesses. It includes standards and codes of practice for working on refrigeration and air conditioning and heat pump equipment, and includes product stewardship requirements along the supply chain. So we've had this system roughly in place for about 20, 25, maybe even 30 years. But we didn't start out with such a comprehensive system, and I think it's important to note that actually our system has evolved over time, and the system that we have now is the result of experience and the result of close collaboration and learning as we have gone along to figure out which points we need to push to make our scheme more successful, and we can see that on the next slide in more detail. So we've identified at least 4 key points here, so involve all parties in the supply chain. So as we said, there's a requirement for businesses who are importing refrigerant to be part of a product stewardship scheme. We have licence requirements for businesses and for technicians. And we have the ARC Industry Board, which administers our end-use permit scheme. the rules that we have also help to change the culture in Australia. So we have requirements under the Act for qualifications and that need to be met for technicians. We have regulation for refrigerant handling, and we require work practices to minimise emissions, which is framed by our legislation. Interestingly, we actually have an interesting funding model in Australia. So, importers are required to pay the government fees for their licences, but also on the per kilo refrigerant that is imported into Australia. Industry also is placing an import levy on the refrigerant that's imported into Australia as well, and that pays for the product stewardship scheme that RRA, Refrigerant Reclaim Australia, actually has put in place. So the fees, the government fees, pay for the administration of our program, and the industry fees help pay for the product stewardship element of the framework. There are also rebates on returned refrigerant. So some of the industry import fees that importers pay to the industry body RRA, they are used to provide rebates to technicians and to retailers to return refrigerant. So there's a small financial incentive there to return refrigerant up the reverse supply chain. And that's the point in the last box that we have there, is that we do have this network that has been put in place that from the importers, the wholesalers and the retailers for sales, for return of refrigerant. Where you buy your refrigerant is where you return your refrigerant. It's the same place. And that makes it really easy for technicians. When they go and buy a new cylinder, they also return their cylinder of used refrigerant. And also there are rental cylinders available for technicians to use for recovery. So this is the last slide. It's actually a really interesting graph that has been put together by Refrigerant Reclaim Australia. And what it shows is the amount of refrigerant that has been returned to RRA since the start of the program in 1993, I think. So it is actually a 30-year program now I think about it. And what has been marked on the graph are the different policy points that have led to increased refrigerant being returned. So at the start of the program was voluntary. And then in about 2004, the program was actually made mandatory, and there was mandatory recovery. The program was expanded to include HFCs as well in the early 2000s. We can see there that we've marked where 22 equipment was banned. You can see a bit of a dip in recovery there, and that's a direct result of the Australian government putting on an equivalent carbon price, which actually meant that refrigerant became way more valuable and technicians weren't returning it because they wanted to reuse it. And then a couple of years later, that equivalent carbon price was rescinded, and then we started to see refrigerant being returned. And then also towards the end, you can see the pink little parts of the column. That's actually refrigerant that has been reclaimed, because I think, as was mentioned earlier, the economics need to be right for reclaim and reuse of refrigerant. And it needs to be valuable enough for industry to go to the effort to make that refrigerant reusable again and available for resale. So happy to answer any questions. I'd also like to give a plug for our side event on the Australian LRM framework, which is happening tomorrow at lunchtime. So thanks, Jim and Denise.
Thanks, Annie. That's really very impressive how Australia is doing it, and you know it's popping out. The role of the industry is really very important in making it successful. So heading on to the European Commission, I'd like to give Senia the floor.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Happy to be here. So let's dive right in. So I'm here to present the European Union's framework for LRM. The difference between myself and other speakers is that we established legislation at the European Commission that applies automatically to all our EU 27 countries, and then it is implemented by them on the ground. So the core of the European Union's framework for LRM is based on a very strict legislative framework that has been established in 2000 concerning ozone-depleting substances and in 2006 concerning hydrofluorocarbons. And as I said, it applies automatically without the need for intermediate measures throughout the EU borders. It covers rules from the beginning, from the production of the substance, and goes until the end of life of the concerned equipment. First and foremost, there are rules on prevention of emissions. Intentional release is unlawful. Where release is technically necessary, then there is the obligation to take all feasible measures, including recapturing techniques. And these obligations apply to all actors, so manufacturers, operators, users of equipment, and throughout all stages, production, transport, transfer. There are also obligations to carry out leak checks, and to record those activities so that the enforcement authorities are able to monitor those. Legislation also refers to how often these leak checks should be carried out, and it applies on rack equipment, so stationary rack equipment, but also on some mobile equipment. There are also obligations to recover controlled substances from containers, but also from stationary rack equipment and mobile equipment, as well as from foams since 2024. If the controlled substances are recovered temporarily for the purpose of being reused again in the equipment, then there is an obligation to recycle and reclaim before that is done. There are also rules on destruction. So the destruction of controlled substances may only occur by technologies approved by the Montreal Protocol. And we have a ban on halon destruction to cover cases where we still don't have alternatives available, for example, for fire extinguishers in aviation, to ensure availability of halons in such cases. EU law also envisages the establishment of producer responsibility schemes since the early 2000s. In addition, a very important measure is very strict rules on the level of knowledge that technicians need to have that maintain, service, repair, recover, or decommission equipment that contain controlled substances, but also, since 2024, when they contain HFOs and key alternatives to F-gases. These certification requirements cover mainly rack equipment, but also a number of key mobile equipment. We have a full ban on non-refillable containers since 2007. This means that they simply cannot exist on the territory. So the only solution would be to confiscate and destroy them, allowing, of course, the recovery of the controlled substances before destruction takes place. Highlighted enough, and thank you to the task force for mentioning it, it's penalties. When penalties are not dissuasive, or in our case, when penalties differ across EU borders, allowing crime shopping to areas where maybe legislation is not so strict, then the rules will simply not be effective enough. In our case, vending is a crime. It's punishable by imprisonment. So is illegal import, export, and use of controlled substances. In cases where imprisonment is not enough or a crime has not been committed and our member countries decide to put financial penalties, those have to be at least 5 times higher than the level of the illegal gains obtained, or 8 times if the crime has been repetitive. Now, the legislation I just presented, it's basically on fluorine greenhouses and ozone-depleting substances strictly, but there is also other EU laws that complement these rules: Waste Framework Directive, the Landfill Directive, Waste Shipment Regulation, and others. Now, as I said, enforcement of these rules is carried out by our member states, so at national level, which means that depending on the circumstances of each of our member states, some of them have decided to establish additional rules or even stricter rules going beyond those that I just presented. Just some examples: we have had the establishment of national central registration databases for leak checks, servicing and decommissioning, or central reporting databases for importers, exporters, operators, reclamation, destruction facilities, and these really help market surveillance authorities and environmental inspectors and customs controls to trace activities and also to prevent not just emissions but illegal trade. There have also been deposit refrigerant systems which really incentivize proper collection, financial incentives by governments for those that recycle and reclaim, tax on imports as well as on sales of high global warming potential HFCs, and also some of the containment measures like leak checks, for example, in some of our member states go beyond those that I just mentioned. So, for example, they might cover all mobile equipment, including ships. It's let's say, a bit of a comfortable position for me to sit here and present on the rules, but it's a challenge to implement them and monitoring them, all these detailed rules at national level. One of the challenges we hear is because our certification of technician rules now include more equipment, including mobile, and cover also more gases, so HFOs and alternatives, there is a need to scale up the number of training centers and trainers at national level. And there are also attempts to increase the share of female technicians, which we hear all parties also mentioning that challenge. And of course, as I said, enforcement, it's difficult taking into consideration all the activities involved and all the actors involved across EU borders. Now on our last slide, some lessons learned. We think it works. We have seen that our 2006 FGAS regulation that merely included containment measures, there was no phase out or bans. Even with those measures, we could clearly see a prevention of emissions. That was already an extremely good sign. Now, since the 2014 FGAS regulation until today, we have seen that the amounts of reclaimed HFCs has almost tripled. After the adoption of our 2024 FGAS regulation, we also see reclamation activities increasing because in addition to the rules that I just mentioned, we have more incentives in the legislation. As many speakers mentioned and also highlighted in the task for conclusion, scarcity is key. When you have rules that allow controlled substances to be plentiful on the market and prices remain low, then you will not have a lot of incentives for recovery and reclamation. So scarcity is really important to incentivize recovery and reclamation and recycling. And of course, the use of bans we have in the EU law on virgin substances for existing equipment also incentivize reclamation. And as a previous speaker mentioned, avoid where possible. So use alternative refrigerants to avoid future bans. And just as a final note, one of the future things we will be assessing in the EU legislation to increase the success of emission decrease in the future would be to look at mobile equipment like ships, where we see that there is some work still to be done. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senia. The challenges in Europe or in the European Union must be very different, no, as well. But we will now proceed to the next presenter from Ghana. Pauline, you have the floor.
Good morning, everyone. Today I'll be sharing Ghana's experience on life cycle refrigerant management. I would like to start with an introduction where Ghana is to phase out ozone depleting substances by 2030, and we are supposed to reduce by 80% climate harmful gases in 2045. Also, we have defined some ambitious climate targets in our NDCs. We have developed 19 policy actions inclusive of the RAC sector across 10 priority areas. By 2030, we're looking to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 64 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. It's worth noting that Ghana is still in the preparatory phase towards the implementation of environmentally sound recycling of RAC equipment. However, we have established some legal and regulatory frameworks, the first one being the implementation of the Hazardous and Electronic Waste Control Management Act, which has made provision for domestic refrigerators and air conditioning units. Secondly, we're implementing the LI 2250, which is on hazardous, electronic, and other waste control management and regulation. This LI looks at this LI makes it a requirement for collectors, importers, and dismantlers to obtain a permit. Also, it provides a take-back system where individuals, workshops, and institutions asked to facilitate the take-back of RAC equipment. It also looks at avoiding the venting of ODSs. In Ghana, we are anchoring the national standard for the certification of RAC technicians into our legislation. This would make it mandatory for all RAC technicians to be certified. We have also developed an e-waste technical guideline, which ensures that the correct procedures are followed through by collectors, recyclers, and dismantlers throughout the entire management process. I would like to share some few key actions and experiences that are being implemented by the EPA. So firstly, under the HPMP project and in collaboration with UNDP, we have established 4 centers of excellence, which have also been equipped so technicians can undergo practical and theoretical sessions on the recovery and recycling of ODSs. The NOU also encourages the formation of refrigeration associations. One association we've been working closely with is the National Association for Air Conditioning and Refrigeration Workshop Owners. We have equipped them and they undergo continuous training at these established centers of excellence. We also reported the input and output of cooling appliances available at workshops so we can sustainably have data on the appliances that are available and have reached their end of life at the workshops. Standard operating procedures have been developed under an e-waste project and with the help of GIZ. This details some obligations and requirements for managers on the dismantling of refrigerators and freezers, as well as the safe recovery of refrigerants and refrigerant oils. What is next now is that collection centers are being constructed for the aggregation and pre-treatment of e-waste appliances. Refrigeration and air conditioning appliances are inclusive. There's a sole company, which is the Zeal Environmental Technology Limited. It has set up a rotary kiln incinerator, and this incinerator is capable of extracting ozone-depleting substances and HCFCs. However, it's currently being restructured so it can improve its processes. A continuous emission monitoring system is going to be attached to this kiln so we can accurately report and measure our emissions of flue gases in accordance with regulations. To my last slide, I would like to speak on some lessons learned and then followed by the results. So during our trial systems with the foams, we observed that some additional technical assessment needs to be conducted so we can achieve complete incineration. Also, the continuous emission management systems are to be tailor-made, so this can sometimes cause some delays due to lengthened procurement processes. To some achievements, however, we have developed an inventory and technology gap analysis for the refrigeration and air conditioning sector. As well, we have developed the Ghana refrigeration and air conditioning roadmap. What is yet to be done is an ODS roadmap, but it's in the pipeline. Under the World Bank project, we are planning to establish 6 collection and dismantling centers, to be able to aid in the collection, transport, and dismantling of e-waste, rack equipment also inclusive. Hopefully by 2025, we would have installed the SEMs and they're supposed to be fully functional. This will help us accurately report on our emissions and sound operations. Also, once these centers are established, we'll be able to distract and destroy e-waste fractions, refrigerants and refrigerant oils. This brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Pauline. And we've heard from 4 countries or 4 presenters so far. We're a little bit delayed on time, so I'll just have a few questions for our first 4 presenters. And if you can try to speak and respond within 1 minute, that's really a challenge. But first, I'd like to ask Xenia, in the European Union, where venting is a crime, how has the EU implemented the extended producer responsibility for refrigerant recovery and recycling? And what role do manufacturers play in the collection and disposal of refrigerants?
So I will try to reply in 1 minute. So since the early 2000s, refrigeration, air conditioning, and heat pump equipment are covered by e-waste legislation, which means that producers remain responsible for the climate effects of their product throughout its life cycle. This means that they have to cover the financial elements related to the collection and recycling. They also have to ensure that they have detailed manuals on how their equipment have to be repaired, and they also have to report on the quantities they place on the market per EU country. Now, recent legislation also makes it obligatory for these producers, manufacturers, to cover the financing for the recovery, recycling, reclamation, or destruction of basically fluorinated greenhouse gases and ODS. So this is new. And then governmental initiatives help by monitoring and, of course, by ensuring penalties are applicable when needed.
Very good. And and in Japan, where you also have quite you're with your act. So how do you ensure compliance with the refrigerant management regulations in Japan, Mr. Teruo?
Yes, I already explained about raising awareness and training sessions in the last slide. In addition, I'd like to give an example of the revision of the Fluorocarbon Emissions Control Act in 2019. This revision required equipment managers to deliver a collection certificate to waste disposers or recyclers when handing over the equipment. It also prohibited waste disposers and recyclers from collecting equipment containing fluorocarbons without a collection certificate. So most waste disposers and recyclers reject to collect without a certificate now. There is a case where police arrested scrap metal dealers in breach of the regulation, in 2022. This case got media coverage and had a big social impact. We conducted a seminar for local government officials to share the know-hows of effective oversight of business operators by using this case. Thank you.
Thank you. And moving on to Australia, where you have such a high recovery rate and having like a big geography, you know, what specific infrastructure for recovery, reclamation, destruction plants has been developed in Australia to support LRM, and how has Australia overcome challenges in terms of, as mentioned, geographic spread and transportation logistics? 1 minute.
1 minute. Seriously? Thanks, Denise. We did talk. I did talk earlier about our reverse supply chain, and I think that's been pretty critical to making sure that not only is refrigerant available in more remote areas, and there are a lot of those in Australia, but also that because there's the obligation to take back refrigerant, that the same businesses that supply the refrigerant are also obliged to take back the refrigerant. And that is, I think, very critical for technicians and businesses in remote areas to make sure they have access to that product stewardship scheme. I also briefly mentioned earlier that recovery cylinders can be rented, which I think is sort of really helpful. Sometimes we have challenges with businesses in remote areas having enough financial supply, financial money or money to be able to pick up and buy cylinders. So actually having cylinders for rent is actually pretty important. And that's what I talked about earlier about, at least in Australia's case, refrigerant management is all about cylinders. It's cylinder management. And then just finally, the Australian Refrigeration Council, which looks after our technician licensing scheme, education, outreach, doing some inspections on the ground. They also have a lot of officers that have been deployed into regional areas as well. So I think from the technician side, that is also really helpful in making sure that, you know, not only are obligations being understood and met, but education and awareness raising is also happening in the regions as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Annie. And then for Pauline in Ghana, you know, so far you're the only A5 country that has presented. Who were the key stakeholders involved in Ghana's effort to work on LRM implementation, and how did you engage them? What worked and what didn't work in that case?
So as mentioned in the presentation, we heavily engaged technicians. As well, we're working with the importers to let them know what the schedule for the phase down of some refrigerants, also with the distributors of these equipment and some government institutions, primarily the customs in charge of at the border posts and Energy Commission. So we are facing a challenge with the importers. There is a preference of them still to bring in HFC run equipment. That is because they know that we still have some time to phase these out. So it's going to take them a while to leapfrog to hydrocarbon-based appliances. Thank you, Denise.
Thank you.
So now we're going to move to the second batch of countries, and I'll call on Nancy Ackerman from US to present their example. Nancy, please.
Thanks, Jim. I'm Nancy Ackerman. I work in the Stratospheric Protection Division of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. And our office is responsible for implementing the Montreal Protocol in the United States domestically. So I'm really excited to be here today to share with you our HFC emissions reduction and reclamation program, which is really brand new. We just finalized it in the middle of September, and it will go into effect in a couple months. So So this is the third of our 3 major programs to implement the HFC phase down in the United States. And it's putting into place a lot of provisions for both the refrigeration, air conditioning, and heat pump sector and the fire suppression sector. I'm just going to focus on the RACHP provisions today. So as you can see here on this slide, there are sort of some main provisions pulled out here. The first of which is leak repair. So this program is actually putting into place requirements to repair leaky equipment within a certain time frame. So anytime a technician comes out to service equipment and is adding or removing refrigerant, they're required to calculate what exactly is the leak rate of this equipment. And if it exceeds a certain threshold, then they are required to find and repair these leaks within 30 days. So that is something that we've been doing for ODS equipment, and now we are extending that to HFC containing equipment. Also, on the top right, we are requiring that appliances, certain types of appliances in the commercial refrigeration sector, for example, are now being required to use automatic leak detection systems. So this will help owners and operators realize when their equipment is actually leaking, and they can address it most efficiently, so expeditiously. And then the next 2 in the middle row there are things that we're pretty excited about. These are sort of new ideas that we've been able to look at for HFCs. So the first on the left is the reclamation standard. So for HFC refrigerants that are recovered and then reclaimed, they're usually processed back to a certain purity level, and quite often that reprocessing is achieved by blending in virgin refrigerant. So to label your refrigerant as reclaimed, there was previously no indication of how much virgin refrigerant may have been added to that recovered refrigerant. So you could have, just 1% was recovered material and 99% was virgin material. So we've actually put in place a standard that says that all reclaimed refrigerant can contain no more than 15% by weight virgin HFCs, so that consumers have a better understanding of what they are actually receiving when they buy something that's labeled reclaimed. And on the right, in the second provision there, is that we are requiring that certain sectors use reclaimed materials for servicing. So the 3 sectors that we're starting with are supermarket systems, they're commercial refrigeration systems in supermarkets, refrigerated transport, and automatic commercial ice makers. So these 3 types of equipment need to be only serviced with reclaimed material. And we also have some provisions for requiring that the refrigerant heel contained in a disposable cylinder is recovered and removed before that cylinder is recycled in a scrapyard, for example. And of course, all comes along with record keeping and reporting and labeling requirements. So in addition to our regulatory program, we also have other approaches that we're taking to look at refrigerant management in the United States. So these include voluntary programs like our Green Chill Partnership Program, which is where we work with supermarkets, food retailers, both large and small stores, to reduce their refrigerant emissions and their impact on the climate. So these partners in this program really are going beyond the requirements in our regulations to try and lower their greenhouse gas footprint. And what we've really found with this program is that just taking stock of your own data helps people understand where they may have places for improvement in their own systems. So supermarkets in the US, the industry average leak rate for refrigeration equipment is about 25% of the refrigerant every year, which is pretty high. But when we had partners join this program, we asked them to keep track of their leak rates so that they could set goals to improve how much refrigerant was actually leaking out of their systems. And they found, you know, a lot of partners realized we don't actually have good records on this. When they started taking this data and recording it, they realized where they could make improvements. And so the average Green Shield partners refrigerant leak rate is about 12%. So it's about half of the industry average. So we think this is a great way for companies to make improvements on their emissions. And finally, we have a grant program that I just wanted to highlight. So this year in the summer, we issued a call for proposals for companies or educational institutions to put in their ideas for HFC reclaim and innovative destruction. So we were able to allocate $15 million in funds to 5 different entities this fall who are developing projects for HFC reclamation and destruction. So for example, one of the grantees is looking at making a portable destruction technology so that they can bring this destruction capability to a place instead of having people bring their refrigerants to a facility to be destroyed. So, I just wanted to talk about some key lessons learned here from our program. So first of all, we think stakeholder engagement and outreach is key to any successful program. So we do a lot of work with our stakeholders while we're developing our regulations, and then we do a lot of educational outreach while we're implementing. And then, like I said, we have both regulatory programs and we also have voluntary programs. So it's good to use multiple approaches to sort of cover different areas and combat things from different angles. And the third thing I wanted to mention was that it's really important to just start your program, and then you can always strengthen it and find ways to improve it and go back and fill in any gaps as you go. And finally, data transparency is super important. So as I mentioned with our Green Shield program, once people actually started recording their data and looking at it, they realized where they could make improvements. So on the right-hand side of this slide, there's a graph here for the amount of refrigerant that's been reclaimed in the US over time. So the first 3 bars there are the dark blue and the orange colors are for ozone depleting substances, and then starting in 2017 we started collecting data on HFC. So those are the sort of green and light pale green colors on the top of the bars there. So this has been super useful for us to provide this data on our website. Companies can go and see, you know, what are the most popular HFCs that are being recovered and reclaimed and available for reuse. So I encourage you to go and look at our website there, and then also if you download the whole slide presentation, we have a resources slide in there with links to our HFC data hub, this reclamation trend data website, and also all of our federal regulations and our Green Shield program. Thanks.
Thank you, Nancy, for presenting this this holistic, brand new LRM national framework. Congratulations on that. It's very inspirational. Next, I'd like to invite Sergio Marino from Mexico to present his country's experience. Sergio, please.
Thank you, Ian. Let me just start by thanking the Ozone Secretariat for putting together this workshop that is going to be very enriching for the work that we have to conduct in our countries in the coming years. Actually, I have already learned a lot from my fellow speakers, so thank you very much. I'm going to talk about the experience in Mexico. That I have to say, it has been also a very humbling experience listening to my colleagues, because even if we already have something done in Mexico in terms of the national framework, one realizes how much still needed to be done. We have legislation in place in the correspondent secretariats, including environment, economy, treasury, transportation, foreign affairs, regarding topics as leak prevention, disposal, handling, used and waste equipment, but not specific regulation for ODS and HFC at decommissioning of equipment. And that's only part of the problem. But another important part is that making sure the existing regulation is enforced is still a challenge. So supervising and making sure that the regulation is actually enforced is very, very difficult. We don't have EPR schemes. The General Law of Ecological Equilibrium and Environmental Protection establishes a shared and differentiated responsibility for all stakeholders in the supply chain and life cycle of products and services. But that's it. We have had some focused incentive programs in the past that had provided a basis for the strengthening of LRM, but still not sustainable once the program's finished. And actually that's a story that I have in the next slide. This is maybe the most successful program we have had so far in terms of replacement of equipment. It was called Change Your Old One for a New One. That I have to say that it was, the target was to replace old equipment, old mainly domestic refrigerators, but also AC units, for new equipment. But the focus was on energy efficiency. And that was in place between 2009 and 2012. And the numbers that were reached were the replacement of close to 1.7 million refrigerators and 200,000 AC units. It was supported by two different public funds. Thanks to those funds, customers paid the new equipment in installments via their utilities bills. And of course, that resulted also in ODS and HFC waste. We have some numbers there, close to 15 tons of R12, more than 32 tons of R22, and 22.4 tons of R134A. So that need created the beginning of the strengthening of the CRR network throughout the country. So more than 100 collection and scrapping and 10 recovery and recycling of refrigerant centers were put in place, where customers could take their old equipment. That was one of the requisites for obtaining the benefits of the program. And but the problem was what to do with the refrigerants that were actually in those centers. So that's where a project funded by MLF came into solving this problem. It was an ODS destruction demonstration project approved in 2011 for $1.4 million. And here are the results and the lessons learned. The first idea under that project was to export the waste refrigerants for destruction, but that was not possible, and it was because of their classification, as they were hazardous materials under national legislation, which is something that was mentioned already by Hildy in the beginning of our session today, and sounded very familiar to me. The classification is always a big issue in dealing with this kind of substances. So fortunately, there were other two alternatives domestically. And so these two methods were used. An argon plasma arc between 2015 and 2016, through which 74 tons of ODS were destroyed. That's in Monterrey, in the northern part of the country. And also a cement kiln between 2016 and 2017 with the destruction of 39 tons of ODS. And that's a plant that is in Colima, one of the states in the Pacific of Mexico. But the thing is that after 2017, no significant destruction has taken place. So once the program finished, the Change Your Old One for a New One ended, there was a problem to sustain the business model for these destruction alternatives. And in terms of the whole CRR network, we also have a very big change. By 2023, and as we were preparing Kharkiv, we found out that only 24 CNS and 7 RRR centers are still in operation. So that is evidence of no sustainable business model in the absence of a continuous flow of waste. And of course, both the activities under our first stage of KIP and what's the third stage of our HPMP, which is going to start next year, as well as COP activities, will help the country to account, characterize SAO and HFC banks, strengthen our C network, increase F-gas recovery rates, explore extended and shared producer responsibility programs, develop circular economy models in the direct sector, reduce cost of destruction of gases, among other activities. And I have to say, and I have to highlight that as members of COPA, we have taken advantage of the support of both COPA and UNIDO, and we have an ongoing development of a third alternative for destruction in a rotary kiln. I didn't include the details in the presentation because it was only last week that we actually finalized the details, and we can confirm that they are going to be able to receive the funds from COPA, and they will be able to invest in the adequations, the modifications that they have to do to their plant in order to be able to destroy also the substances that we are interested in. And this is not a cement kiln. Is a plant, an incineration plant that is already active in the middle of the country, very close to Mexico City. So this is going to provide for a third alternative also for destruction in the country, and we are very happy to see how that goes on, which is very close to what Nancy was mentioning in terms of it's very difficult to get the substances to the destruction sites. So as much as we can get more close the alternatives to the actual substances to be destroyed, that's a great move forward. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sergio. And I think he described Mexico's pioneering work in this area, and a lot of the challenges, including regulatory challenges, but also enforcement challenges. But I think that's what comes with being a pioneer and testing out those concepts and learning by doing. And we heard that also from Australia, also how things are iterative and you learn as you go through the process. So now I have the pleasure of inviting our last speaker, Mr. Aditya Narayan Singh, to present India's example. Mr. Aditya, please.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank Secretariat for giving us opportunity for presenting the national, for sharing the experiences. This slide shows the overview of national LRM framework. In India, we have the e-waste management rules. Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change has notified e-waste management rules with the objective to dispose e-waste in an environmental sound manner in 2022 under the Environmental Protection Act 1986. And end-of-life RSC equipment is covered under e-waste regulation. And this e-waste rules 2022 was amended in 2023, and necessary provisions have been introduced in the e-waste management rules through an amendment notified on 24th July 2023 for appropriate management of disposal of refrigerant at the end of life of RSC equipment. And guidelines for implementation of these rules are being framed. This basically involved several steps: collection, segregation, transportation, recovery, reclaim, and destruction. And this e-waste rule basically involve extended producer responsibility, and this has also been introduced as a part of e-waste rules 2016, and which includes provision for managing electronic waste and associated refrigerant by equipment manufacturers. And this slide shows key actions by India. This includes management of end-of-life refrigerant, which is recovered this is also covered in the training curriculum of RSC service technicians. And chapter including recovery, reclamation, and reuse of refrigerant is also included in the training curriculum. Recently, we have introduced certification system for service technicians, which will be implemented through HPMP. And a separate category has been created for services under government e-market portal to enable public procurement of trained and certified servicing technicians by the government department and organization. Under e-waste rule, the requirement of responsible management of refrigerants has been established and applies to manufacturers, refurbishers, and recyclers throughout the product life cycle. And this rule also mandate CPCB, Central Pollution Control Board, which is basically a technical arm of Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, for giving approval for destruction technologies. This also includes compliance with extended producer responsibility, which is an essential component in India, moving forward towards environmental sustainability. Manufacturer producers responsible for end-of-life of product equipment, which also includes RSC equipment. And CPCB has also issued guidelines for environmentally sound facility for handling processing and scrapping of vehicle at the end of life, in which management of refrigerant gases has been duly addressed. And this slide shows results and lessons learned. There is a need for development of circular economy model for effective management of waste and creation of value chain, and competency enhancement of small, medium-sized enterprises in utilizing energy saving and environmental friendly technologies, which comprises a large number of enterprises in the servicing sector. And the refrigerant recovery with adequate purity level to be recycled and reused is a major challenge to be addressed. We are in process for development of quality standards for the refrigerant to be used. And there is also, considering the complex design of equipment, dismantling and recovery of refrigerant becomes more difficult for untrained technicians. Unified certification system for servicing technicians along with the training is an important way forward to address this challenge. And there is also need of high infrastructure and associated costs comprising storage and transportation of containment of contaminated refrigerant to the reclamation and destruction facility are serious, basically, deterrents. And there is a need of financing mechanism for the effective management of the waste refrigerant. Thank you for the attention.
Thank you, Mr. Aditya, and I think we start seeing commonalities between all of these presentations, and I congratulate India on its comprehensive LRM system. None of these are without challenges, and we heard at the end financing. Financing is also and business models are one of the issues I think that affect all of the systems. Okay, normally we would be asking the presenters questions from the podium here, but in the interest of time and giving people the opportunity to raise questions, we're going to now open it up for audience participation. So we've got about 15, 20 minutes or so to ask questions of our expert presenters, and if you could please, when you take the floor, first, raise your flag so that we can see you, or wave your arms. And if you could identify yourself either by country or organization if you're not with a country. I think we'll start the process. I think we have Bahrain first. Bahrain, please.
Good morning, everybody, and thanks a lot for our panelists for their excellent presentation and experience they share with us. Actually, I have two questions, if you allow me, one for Japan and another for my neighbor here, Australia. First, to Japan, I see your experience with regard to the reclaiming and recovery. In 2022, actually, I found, as per the figures that you show on slide 3, around 4 tons only was recovered from disposal or from the recovery, I mean reclaimed, or recovery, yeah, recovered from the disposal or from the maintenance. And my question is, this average of the reclaiming or recovery for the refrigerant is acceptable? Is it with the range that you expect, I mean, or you have some plans to enhance this in the future? Just, I want to understand more the amount, because I see the amount would be a little bit low level, if I have a good understanding on that. Because I see here 4 tons only in total in 2022. And with regard to Australia, first of all, let me tell you, I'm so proud and like your experience within the last 20 years. And as you said, during 20 years, you enhance also this experience between time to time. And we see a lot of the efforts and backs actually reflected very well in your presentation, and also from my reading before about your experience in this. I see a lot of the important elements actually affects the successful, or lead to the successful of this experience, like the regulation that you put, policies, certificate schemes, management for the containers, a lot of things actually, a lot of elements we can see lead to this successfully. And I see again in 2023, after 20 years of the experience, we have around 600 tons of the reclaiming. You have it, and this is a big number actually for me. But my question is, I felt I hear that from you, but I want to hear it exactly. You see some gaps in your experience you would like to share with us, kind of lesson learns that you want to advise us about it? Thank you very much.
We're going to take a couple of questions, and then we'll have the presenters respond. Next was Armenia.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank all the countries sharing the experience with us. This has been very useful. And my question goes to those who have a ban on venting in place. Particularly, I'm interested a lot how the evidence is collected to prove that the actual venting took place. Because I'm asking this question because we are thinking about introducing the same measure in Armenia, and this is a very important aspect for us to know. Thank you.
Next is Barbados, please.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you to all of the panelists. I have quite a few questions, but I'll keep my first two to Ghana and the USA. I was just querying how were the centers of excellence funded in Ghana? And then to the USA, you mentioned the leak repair provisions. So I was just wondering, in terms of your legislation, which party is liable under that legislation in terms of not repairing relevant leaks? So is it the technician or the owner of the equipment? Thank you.
Okay, we're going to start with this first batch of questions, and if we have time, we'll come back for another batch. So, Teruo-san, the first question from Bahrain was on the level of recovery, of reclaim and recovery 4 tons in 2022. And was that was that range okay? Was that what was expected? Plans to enhance it? Thank you.
I'm sorry, but I don't have the answer at the moment, so I'll check it later.
Okay, thank you very much. The second question was also for Australia from Bahrain about the enhanced experience. What are the gaps and lessons learned from this 3 decades of experience?
Thanks very much, San. Please come to our site event on Monday, because we will exploring that in a little bit more detail. But just off the top of my head, I can say that there are 2 lessons learned, one which we did learn and one which we wish we had have learned. So the lesson we did learn, and which we would really encourage, I think, is with regards to technicians, is that we ended up with a recognition of prior learning program to ensure that technicians were included in the scheme on a temporary basis until they were able to be marked as qualified and meeting the requirements under the Act. So that ensured that we didn't have a shortfall of technicians. It meant that technicians weren't thrown out of their jobs. And over a few years, this program was over a few years, there was the opportunity for those technicians to become qualified and to be incorporated properly into the program. And I think that's a really important lesson, especially for countries where technicians aren't trained or qualified, and it gives the opportunity for those technicians to work and then become qualified and stay in the industry. The second lesson that we just didn't and we couldn't really put into place because of our situation is that our scheme only includes Montreal Protocol controlled refrigerants. So CFCs, HCFCs, HFCs, the 18 HFCs listed in Annex F. So our scheme doesn't include hydrocarbons, HFOs, ammonia. So actually I think there is a gap there in terms of coverage of the industry and coverage of technicians. Now a lot of those technicians are the same technicians, and they will have those skills anyway just because of the qualifications that they've obtained, but we don't have any oversight of those. If those technicians only worked on ammonia and only worked on hydrocarbons, they do not need to be in our scheme. So I think that's actually something I would urge countries to think really deeply about, is the scope of their technician scheme, and if they can incorporate like a more comprehensive approach to refrigerant certification. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And then the next question was from Armenia. It was for those countries or regions or countries that have bans on venting. How is the evidence collected that there was venting? So yeah, probably the EU would be a good place to start.
Yes, thank you. So in our EU legislation, as I said, we have an obligation to prevent emissions. When release is technically needed, then the operator must ensure that they have used all possible techniques to avoid that emissions reach the atmosphere, including recapturing techniques. All of these technologies that they have to use and all of the efforts they have to make, they have to retain evidence of it. at least for 5 years, which means that this facilitates a bit the role of environmental inspectors and market surveillance authorities to do ad hoc checks or program checks and to see, to investigate and to analyze the situation either before it happens, so as a prevention measure, or later on, and if evidence shows a problem, then of course then this is followed up by the judging system to impose the penalties.
Thanks. Anyone else want to chime in on that? No? Okay, well, we have plenty of questions, so that's fine. So the next question was from Barbados. The first part was for Ghana. To explain what's the role and of centers of excellence, and how does it fit into the scheme? Thank you. And is it funded? I think was another part. So.
Thank you for the question. The centers of excellence were established in the first phase of our HPMP project, and they were funded and equipped by the MLF. Thank you.
The second part of the question from Barbados was for the U.S. about leak repair legislation. Nancy, maybe you can respond to that, please?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So it was a question about who's liable for not holding up to the leak repair. So it really actually depends on the case. So it could be technicians or owner-operators. So of course there are record-keeping requirements, and so that's often how we can track who's responsible.
Great. Okay, we have time for a few more questions. The next on the list is India. India, please.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Facilitator, and good morning to all. And thanks to all the speakers for the presentations. I have 3 questions, one each for Australia, EU, and Ghana. My first question to Australia is, you talked about the standards and codes of practice for working on RAC HP equipment. Is it for the manufacturers only, or for all the dealers and technicians also? And how the standards and codes of practice, the implementation is ensured? I would like to just understand a bit more on that. My second question to EU is, you talked about the financial incentives for recycling and reclamation. Can you throw a little more light on what type of financial incentives are provided? And then the representative of Ghana talked about the implementation of a standard operating procedure. I just want to understand whether it's how that has any regulatory framework, it falls under any regulatory framework, or it is just an SOP, and how the implementation of that SOP is assured if there is no regulatory framework backing for it. Thank you.
Okay. Next was Mozambique, please.
Thank you very much for the floor. Allow me, first of all, to congratulate all the presenters for the rich information given for the participants, and we hope to use it in our workshops. Secondly, I want to comment. We have here very rich information for our countries, and some of them are becoming mandatory. But there is a big problem. How to implement those mandatories when the country has not condition in some community. What I mean was this. Like in Mozambique, up to now, we don't have the recycling machine. And we're encouraging the people, please recover the refrigerant and the recycling, then you reuse to the equipment. But up to now, we don't have the recycling machine, and we can't force the people to do some practice when the condition is not on the table. So we want to request the MLF if you can revise some of fundings to our countries to see how we can cover all the community to have the recovering and the recycling machine. I'm coming for the European Union. I'm sorry for the question. It's someone from other area, not refrigeration center. So some question maybe can be not make sense. You said full ban on non-refillable containers since 27. What's wrong with that practice? And I would like to know which type of container are non-refillable and which one is refillable. The last question, I'm sure that some of the presenters can respond. What's the difference between the gas R34A capital? I have been in several different workshops. Always they told me it's not 134A capital. I'm telling that because we had 4 workshops in the country, and we invited our experts in refrigeration and the customer officers. When they did the test, the result was 134A capital. And we changed the identifier. We tried to use another identifier, the same answer. So, which one is fake? The one is appearing with 134A capital or the other one? Thank you.
No, sorry. Okay, thanks. The last in this group is Indonesia. Indonesia, please.
Thank you. Thank you for our panelists who's already been sharing your experiences on the LRM. I just have one question for Ghana, actually, because other notes here is already addressed by other delegates. So you mentioned that Ghana already put the commitment for the HFCs on your NDCs. Since we are now preparing for the second NDC, which has been considered, including the HFC, just wondering how the measurement of this HFC under your NDC, because if I'm not mistaken here, your NDCs regarding the HFCs, if I'm not mistaken here, refrigeration and air conditioning, RIC, is fall into the sustainable energy transition, which is under the energy efficiency, if I'm not mistaken. So how about the HFC itself? Because if we see that under the UNFCCC, the HFC has been kind of not excluded, but different measures for the HFC itself, for the consumption and maybe production in some countries. So how you measure it, because this is only from the energy sector's views. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that question. So going back to the original question. So from India, asked Australia, what about the standards? I'm trying to read my notes. The standards are they for manufacturing only, or also are they more extensive, and how are they implemented?
Thanks, Jim, and thanks, India, for the question. So we have actually standards that the technicians have to abide by in our regulations. So we don't have regulations that apply to manufacture of equipment under our Act. So when I talk about standards and codes of practice, that is particularly in relation to technicians. As I said, the standards are actually outlined in our regulations. How they're implemented, I'm not an expert on that. That's sort of a little bit down in the detail. But the ARC, the Australian Refrigeration Council, which actually looks after our end-use scheme, is responsible for ensuring that the technicians and the businesses have access and have the equipment that they need to abide by those standards, and also that they keep records in relation to the activities that they do. So I think that's part of the answer, but happy to talk a little bit more offline and perhaps get some of our industry experts. We have many at this meeting, by the way, who can chat to you more if you want more detail. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Annie. The next question from India was for the EU on financial incentives for recovery and recycling.
Absolutely. As I said previously, our regulation doesn't cover this aspect, but where our EU countries have seen it necessary, then they indeed provide direct financing either to reclamation facilities or to undertakings that do recovery, reclamation, recycling. As I noted recently in the recent regulation, the financing of recovery, recycling, reclamation, and destruction of those equipment, of the rack equipment that are considered e-waste, will need to be covered by the producer under the extended producer responsibility scheme. So that is something that will be phased in that scheme. However, happy to discuss also offline if you need more information on explicit examples from our member states if needed.
Thanks very much. The third question from India was for Ghana about the standard operating procedures. Does it have a regulatory framework, and how is it implemented?
Standard operating procedures fall within the LI 2250, as mentioned above. During my presentation, it's on hazardous and electronic and other waste control and management regulations to ensure that the proper procedures are followed through by qualified persons. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And then, okay, Mozambique made a statement about its recovery and recycling infrastructure and so forth. I think it was more of a commentary, but there was one question for the EU referring to the full ban on non-refillable containers. And what is fillable, what is not fillable, please?
Yes, so under EU legislation, a non-refillable container, first of all, it can be full, partially full, or empty, but it is divided in two categories. One category is one where it is technically non-refillable, so you can actually not, it's designed not to be refilled, or it could actually be refilled, technically speaking. However, there are absolutely no measures taken for its refilling. So when it is placed on the market, the one that places it on the market must ensure, before it does so, that there are arrangements made to take it back and refill it. If that is not there, that legally speaking, that is also considered a non-refillable cylinder.
Thank you very much. And in the interest of time, I'm going to go to the Indonesia's question, which was for Ghana, which was asking about how do the HFC commitments fit into the NDCs? Where does it appear, noting that the Energy Efficiency Department usually has some role in NDCs, and so how does it appear in the NDC? Thank you.
Ghana is tackling HCFC and HFC reduction in our NDCs. Regarding the energy sector, we're looking at the number of equipments, and this is also which ones will be transferred and replaced with a national refrigerant to reduce our emissions, and this is how we'll be tackling this. It's also included in the second phase of our NDCs. Thank you.
Thank you. I will be the bearer of bad news that unfortunately we have no more time for further questions, but we did list down, and I think it would be good for the panelists to note that there were still some questions from Kenya, Kuwait, Senegal, Egypt, Tunisia, the Maldives, and Namibia, and we encourage you to have this discussion. We'll have a break after, and then we'll also have, the deep dives in the parallel session to continue our very exciting discussions. So at this point, I think we can start with, the final round in terms of the take-home messages from the panelists. So I think we'd like to give our opportunity for some last words, maybe starting with our speakers from Australia, Japan, the US, and the EU as the Article 2 countries. On your experience, what is your key message or advice? 30 seconds to 1 minute.
The hot potato game. So 30 seconds. Once you know what your needs are, your LRM needs are, establish them in legislation. So every actor knows what they have to do, and you also avoid unwanted activities on the side. So everybody follows your line. Make sure that that legislation is holistic, is covering phase down, containment measures, end of life as well as penalties, and avoid, when possible, the use of ODS and HFCs to avoid the increase of banks at the end.
Thank you. Hard to pick. I think the two key points we would like to make, and I think that probably came through in our presentation, was the importance of the collaborative relationship that we have established with industry over 30 years. They have been at our side right from the very start. They have been very positively engaged, and they have been strong and amazing partners to work with. If we have a problem, if we have a concern or a challenge, we don't just legislate. We do legislate, but we also talk to our partners to see what's the best way to legislate. Should we do this in this way or this way? What's going to work? What is actually implementable? And I think that's a really key factor that I would like to share with others. And I think the other point, notwithstanding the US EPA just suddenly putting a refrigerant management framework in place in last month, is an iterative approach. I mean, what we've put in place is pretty comprehensive, but it has occurred over 30 years, and we've had numerous steps along the way to get there. And so I think, as Nancy said at the end of her presentation, just start. Just get some runs on the board, talk to your industry, talk to your technicians, find a way to start, and then build on that base. Thanks.
Thank you. Just as EU said, since fluorocarbons are very powerful climate pollutants, it is essential to define the to make polluters pay the costs for preventing the emissions. So it is necessary to legally define the obligations and the responsibilities of stakeholders. Thank you.
Just to clarify, we did have HFC disposal and other handling regulations in place already before we implemented this emissions reduction and reclamation program. But I would just like to say, I think we've heard from all these different countries, and everybody really does have a different approach. So there's really no one size fits all, and it's important to sort of take what works for your country and your circumstances. And I really enjoy the idea of working with stakeholders and seeing what will meet their needs. Thanks.
Great, thanks. And now if we could have take-home messages from India, Mexico, and Ghana, please. Just a short summary message.
Thank you. Proper implementation framework along with policy is important for success of LRM, and cooperation of all the stakeholders is very important. So that's we need basically. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Jim. Well, for us, a first lesson is to keep on working, raising awareness, because as was mentioned, there are a lot of different alternatives, and there's not a clear recipe, no? So the way in which we can immediately keep on working is raising that awareness through the programs of training technicians that we already have in place. And that really makes a difference, and we have seen that in the field. So we go out of this workshop encouraged to continue on that work, but also on enhancing the coordination with other authorities, because this is a topic that is beyond what we as the area in charge of tracking the fulfillment of the commitments with the Montreal Protocol are in charge of. So keep on working with the other areas, even in the same ministry, but also at other secretariats is very important. And to gain the experience of other programs having to do with recycling and programs as such.
Message, thank you. And then Leslie Paulin, take-home message?
Take-home message is, I believe Ghana, like many Article 5 countries, will continue to learn, build, and then share the best ways possible to implement LRMs in our various countries. Thank you for the opportunity. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And we would like to continue this dialogue. Unfortunately, we don't have any time. The speakers will be available. You can talk to them on a bilateral basis, also including Irene in the back, our keynote speaker. And but also UNEP will continue this dialogue in the regional networks. So the LRM topics will be a regular feature of our networking discussions, where we can pursue these in more detail. And we look forward to those discussions. So as much as we would like to summarize, we're going to leave it to the Ozone Secretariat to summarize in the proceedings. But we'd like to thank all of our participants and speakers for the excellent session. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll keep this short and sweet. Thank you, distinguished delegates, for panelists, for your valuable insights and inputs, and co-facilitators. We'll now break briefly for coffee and light refreshments outside until 11:45, after which we'll start with the breakout sessions. The room locations are up on your screen and also throughout the venue on your blue screens. We'll break for lunch at 1 o'clock and then resume the breakout sessions at 2:30. Thank you.